Continue reading in Ruth chapter 1. In verses 1 to 14, we see that three widows, Naomi and her daughters-in-law, leave Moab for Israel. Naomi urges the two to stay in Moab, where they have a chance to remarry and eventually have a family. One of the women, Orpah, finally consents and turns back toward Moab. Now the other, Ruth, responds. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. In these 4 verses, again Naomi urges Ruth to go back, pointing at Orpah in the distance. Then Ruth gives a beautiful and elegant statement of commitment, of hesed, compassionate loyalty. Notice what she promises. She promises to die with Naomi, and she takes Naomi's God, Yahweh, as hers. What does Ruth mean by her statement? Does she know who Naomi's God is? But what does she know? Why would Ruth promise to even die where Naomi dies? By the way, this is the second place in the Old Testament where a foreigner lays claim to Yahweh, a foreign woman. Can you recall the first place? It's in Joshua 2:11. And what significance does this earlier claim of a foreign woman to Yahweh mean to this story? Continuing to read, so the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord, Yahweh, has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." Naomi means pleasant. Mara means bitter. Notice that the whole town came out. Surely in the crowd were old friends, and in the buildings were old memories, memories of Elimelech and 2 small boys, maybe running around in the passages. Verses 20 and 21 are the only places where Yahweh is not used for God. In those 2 verses, when it talks about God, translated as God, the name for God is El Shaddai. But Naomi accuses the Lord, or Yahweh, of abandoning her. This is the same Yahweh to whom Ruth recently made a commitment. Some questions unanswered by the text. Should Naomi be saying these things about God? What's her opinion of God? How would you respond to a friend who says what Naomi says? Careful, this is a friend. Where is Ruth during these conversations? And who takes care of the widows in Israel? What was the Israel welfare system like? Finishing chapter 1, verse 22. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. A better translation, apparently, to the original Hebrew is that Naomi came home along with her daughter-in-law, Ruth the Moabitess, the one who returned from the fields of Moab. A problem for Old Testament scholars is that the phrase "one who returned" is apparently assigned to Ruth. Do you have any idea why this might happen? Some scholars think that this is an error in translation of the text. Hubbard believes that this is intentional, that the author is saying that Ruth is returning home. Note the title, "The Moabite," is given to Ruth here. The storyteller is deliberately using this term. Notice every time he uses it, there's a purpose. Notice the symmetry of the chapter. Naomi, left with children and famine, returns with Ruth at barley harvest. Indeed, not only is our storyteller ending the chapter with an elegant summary, but raising expectations for the remainder of the story. As chapter 1 concludes, the listeners are supposed to be thinking, "Oh, something's going to happen at the barley harvest." The author of the book clearly mentions Yahweh and his work in places, but at other times he allows hints of chance. That hint appears in this verse. You will see such hints much clearly later. These hints are intended to challenge the listener to decide if he or she really believes in chance. The listener asks, what will happen at Bethlehem? Is there hope for our two refugees? The book of Ruth naturally breaks up into 4 pieces. Although chapters and verses were set up in the Middle Ages and are not part of the original text, this book does naturally break into these pieces, each piece ending with a challenge for the listener to think about what's getting ready to happen next. So we're getting ready to discuss the barley harvest. So read chapter 2 for next time. And as you do so, why do you think Boaz is so supportive of Ruth? Is Boaz very religious? What do you think? And in 2:22, Naomi's afraid of something. In what ways could Ruth be harmed? Boaz seemed to have similar concerns. Next week, we will look more closely at chapter 2.